Javi Lucero, rating 87. Javi's phone vibrated in his pocket. Phones technically weren't allowed on campus. Students could carry them into the building, but they were to be left in lockers at all times. Javi had never once followed this rule. It was probably his it was probably his agent, the same woman who managed both Team MCA and Javi as an individual. The newest Panthera provisionals bearing Javi's likeness on their package had been flying off the shelves. The headset was the hottest selling item, but the gaming mouse and keyboard wasn't far behind. The company had kicked him a nice two-part bonus, a check for what went straight into new clothes for his twins, who stubbornly refused to stop growing, and 4 extra points to his rating. A buzzing was loud enough to be overheard, but the librarian was busy shelving books on the other side of the room. Javi slipped his phone into his pocket and glanced at the screen. There was a new message in the chat server his guild used to keep touch outside Polaris, a private message. DMs usually meant one guild member gossiping about another, but there were 7 in a row from Rogue, which seemed unusual. Javi swiped the chat window open. Rogue rarely ever indulged in idle gossip. Dude, Volps, ping me. There's some weird stuff going down, and I think it would be relevant to your interests. Volps. Volps! Volps! With one eye on the librarian, Javi typed out a reply. What do you want, Rogue? I'm at school. The other day you asked me about the weird graffiti. Javi glanced up from his phone. The librarian was still reading the spines of the books and slowly placing them in the shelves where they belonged. Still sitting at one of the computer terminals in the center of the room seemed like too much of a risk. It wouldn't do to have his phone confiscated. Just then things were getting juicy. Javi stood in nonchalantly as possible, made his way to one of the stacks at the far wall of the room near the end of the aisle. Malapathrope was kept obsessively clean by a dedicated janitorial staff, but there was a musty smell about the shelves Javi had ducked between. There wasn't noticeable dust on the book, but the smell seemed to come from the books themselves. A curious glance at the spines revealed a few titles Javi recognized. A Scarlet Letter, The Catcher in the Rye, but even more he didn't. They were old books, rarely assigned anyone in the school's curriculum. Holdovers from before his time. If he bent down a few inches, he could see the librarian through the stacks. Over the uneven spines of rows and rows of books. So long as he kept one eye on her progress, he'd be safe. He pulled his phone out and tapped the out reply to Rogue. Have you heard anything? More graffiti? ... Javi juggled his foot at the ankle as he started at the blanking dots, which meant Rogue was taking her sweet time typing. The phone vibrated with the incoming message, but it wasn't a text. Rogue has sent a picture. A red brick wall, thick with ivy. The vines had been pushed aside just enough to reveal the text, painted in vivid red. The ratings are not real. What the banana bread? Javi whispered before biting his lip to prevent any other nine sounds from escaping. He developed a habit of replacing profane words with the names of various food. His Abdullah had washed his mouth out with soap last time he cursed in front of his younger siblings. What was this? University campus came Rogue's reply. It was there for a few minutes before it was literally whitewashed away. Went into the student union to pick up study snacks. Okay. Gaming snacks. But whatever. And when I came back out, it was there. Couldn't have been inside for more than 5 minutes. I barely managed to snap a pic before they swooped in to cover it up. Any idea who did it? No, but I'm going to poke around, see if I can dig something up. Let me know what you find, and be careful. Javi leaned against the wall and sank slowly to the floor, phone held tightly in both hands. This wasn't an isolated incident. Whatever was happening at Malapathorpe was happening elsewhere. The jester didn't need to be at Malapathorpe student or teacher, and though the thought had crossed Javi's mind, it could be anyone. It could be numerous people acting in unison. But why? Are you quite all right, Javier? Javi's head jerked up to find the bespectacled and judgmental gaze of the librarian staring down at him. Oh, almost as a reflex, Javi's lips spread into a dazzling grin that paid his tuition and put food on his table. Hi, Miss Rusero. You look nice today. Are those nice new glasses? Nice try, said Miss Rusero. I'm sure you know phones are not to be used on campus during school hours, but Javis pressed the button on the side of the phone, locking it. He was 94% sure he could talk his way out of this. Miss Russo arched one thin eyebrow behind her horn-rimmed glasses. Okay, maybe 90%. It's my Abdullah, she said. She had a doctor's appointment today. I was just taking her to see if everything's okay and she needs a ride home from the clinic. She always loses the number for the car service. The librarian's face softened, but not enough. I usually go with her. It's her hearing, you know. She doesn't feel safe on the train these days. But the only appointment she could get was when I was in school, and Miss Russo held up her hand, stemming the flow of his words. I get it, Javier. Almost no one called him Javier, but he let it slide. He held out the phone in a hand that trembled just enough. I'm sorry. I know I'm not supposed to use this at school, but I'm the oldest sibling, and it's just my Abdullah at home. There isn't anybody else. It was low. He wasn't proud, but he went there anyways. After a moment of excruciating silent deliberation, the librarian heaved a sigh. You're a good kid, Javier, but rules are rules. She tapped her smartwatch, and a second later, his vibrated. His eyes started to the small display on his wrist. A red -1 hovered next to his rating. A provisional deduction, removed at the end of at a 24 period, provided there were no other behavioral infractions. He fought the urge to grin in triumph. The grandma's stories did it every time. No one could resist a quivering chin and an ailing Abdullah. No one was that strong. "Don't let me catch you with that again," said the librarian. "It goes back in your locker where deduction sticks." "Aye, aye, Captain." Javi offered Miss Russo a jaunty salute, which made her smile, a little charmed to seal the deal. With a good-natured roll of her eyes, the librarian left, returning to her cart of unsheathed books. He shoved the phone back in his pocket. He couldn't stay in the stacks much longer without truly incurring Russo's wrath. It wouldn't do him any good to have phone confiscated now. Thankfully, his phone wasn't the only way to access the chat server. The school's computers were layered with firm firewalls to prevent students from looking at things they shouldn't, but Javi had yet to meet an institutional firewall he couldn't hop. It would took some finessing, but he could massage one of the school's computers into giving him free realm of the internet without leaving a single shred of evidence that he'd done it. There was a computer lab on the fourth floor that would do nicely. He exited the stacks, sharing a small sympathetic smile with Miss Russo before grabbing his backpack and leaving the library. He'd said he would deposit the phone back in his locker, and she'd watched him like a hawk to make sure he did so right away, or at least appeared to do so. But first, a pit stop. He'd had a large iced coffee that morning, but now was yearning to be free. The door to the boys' bathroom had barely swung shut behind Javi when he skidded to a stop. Standing in the stink farthest from the door was a boy with a camera, the one he noticed the first day of school, taking pictures of the graffiti and getting hassled by jocks. The boys who blushed so prettily when Javi had carelessly tossed him one of his trademark smiles. Noah Rayner. Not that he dipped into the school's record to learn his name, also hidden by the firewall, too short to stop Javi. That would be super weird. Not the sort of thing a normal sane person would do, but something that he would absolutely do. Noah's eyes were red-rimmed, the skin around them puffy, like he'd just been scrubbing it too vigorously, like he'd been crying. Their reflected glances met briefly in the mirror. Noah sniffed, rubbing at his nose with the navy sleeve of his Malapathrope blazer. "Sorry," he said, fumbling for the backpack he dropped on the floor by the sink. "I'll get out of your way." "Are you okay?" Javi asked, despite the fact the other boy was very obviously not okay. Noah paused, his hands on one of his backpack's straps, when he looked at Javi. There was something in his expression that made Javi reach behind him to flip the locker on the bathroom door. Someone pounded on the other side. "Hey, come on, open up!" Javi rolled his eyes and shouted, "Occupied, you soggy walnut." Mumbling groan faded away as the unfortunate soul left in search of more accessible facilities. Javi's smartwatch buzzed against his wrist. Crud. Another infraction. Even a peer-to-peer one, which he had provisional deduction pinning, was sure to make the first one stick. But mystery radiated off Noah in waves. Maybe there were bigger problems in that bathroom in the moment. I'm fine, Noah said, obviously a lie. You don't have to do that. Javi shrugged. I'll help. I'll jump at any excuse to call someone a soggy walnut. He took a few tentative steps toward the other boy, unsure of his welcome, but Noah did not back away. What happened? Javi asked. They weren't friends. They'd never really spoken before that first day of school, and in the weeks since, their interactions had consisted almost entirely of stolen glances and averted glances. Nothing, Noah replied. Another lie. Sure, sure. Noah leaned his hip against a sink, aiming for casual curiosity. I find myself crying in bathrooms for no reason all the time. I'm not crying. Noah undetermined himself by punctuating the words with a well-timed sniff. Of course not. You're just leaking out of your eyes. Exactly. Javi huffed out a small smile. His smile blinded when Noah did the same. Look, Javi said, I don't know you very well, but you seem nice. You don't know me at all. Javi shrugged. I'm good at reading people. Now are you going to tell me what's bothering you, or do I have to keep peppering you with increasingly intrusive questions? Because I don't think we've got time for that. Noah's smile was a little wobbly, but it was better than crying, so Javi would take it. Noah drummed his fingers against the sink, the sound echoing down across the porcelain. Just family stuff. It's stupid. If it's bothering you, it isn't stupid. Now they were getting somewhere, but before Noah could say anything more, the bell outside shrieked, punctuating the little bubble of semi-privacy Javi had carved from them. I've got to get to class, Noah said, though his tone implied he had little desire to do so. He bent down to pick up his backpack, swaying it onto his shoulder in one fluid move. Something fell out the side pocket and drifted to the ground. Okay, yeah, me too, Javi said, bending down to pick up the paper. It looked like a photograph of Malapathrop, taken from a distance. Javi didn't have to get to class. He had free period. He planned on using to comment several school code violations. He didn't know why he said that. He held the photo out to Noah, who accepted it with a mumbled thanks. But if you want to talk, The rest of Javi's offerings went unspoken when Noah turned the photograph over in his hand, revealing the back, text written in neat block letters like they were cut from a stencil, and a sticker. Marbrice Jester smiled at them as they both stared into some silence. What the garbanzo beans? Javis asked. The universe did not respond. It's difficult, watching from a distance, viewing the players, anticipating their decisions. It's frustrating, infuriating, satisfying, thrilling. All those things and more. But it's not enough. The pieces are moving together, but they need to move faster. They need to move with a purpose. It's a delicate game, knowing when to apply pressure and when to pull back, when to orchestrate and when to observe. They need to see the threads woven through each missive to understand the ties that bind them. They need a focal point, a thing around which they all can rally, a magnet to draw them all in. And then they need something to keep them there, a glue to seal them together, a test to try their strength of connection. It's not kind, that which must be done. Unpleasant deeds are, after all, bred by an unpleasant world. A sacrifice will have to be made, but that is expected. Success, after all, requires sacrifice. Chase dove in. Rating 57. The front door of Chase's house had been painted a happy sunshine yellow 10 years ago. He remembered helping his father complete this job, taping the sides of the door so the paint wouldn't run, dabbling the sharp edges with a small foam brush. He remembered the pride he'd felt glazing upon their finished project, the warmth of his father's hand on his shoulder as they stood in the porch together. Pride wasn't something he felt from his father in many, many years. The first sign Chase had that night would be one of the bad nights that the front door, now bruised yellow of a overripe banana, was unlocked. The hinges creaked as he pushed the door open. He'd have to grease them up soon. Years ago his father would have handled that sort of thing, but recently basic home maintenance had proved less interesting to the elder Dovan than six-pack or two. The interior of the house was as sad as their once proud front door. Stains speckled the baguette carpet. No matter how vigorously Chase had tried to scrub the evidence of skilled whiskey away, cigarettes burns gathered in hollows across the arms of the couch. In addition to brushing his teeth and at least attempting his homework, part of Chase's ritual was making sure his father hadn't fallen asleep with a cigarette in hand. The couch, a hideous patterned affair that had probably been in style decades before Chase's birth, had the look of something extremely flammable. Every night he half expected to wake up to a shrill screech of smoke alarms as he kept faithfully stocked with fresh batteries. He couldn't stop his father from lighting himself or the house on fire, but he could take as many preventative measures as possible to keep them both alive. Frowns drafted from the TV room where Chase stood just outside the door. He recognized the voice of the announcer and the rise and fall of the crowd's cheers. He'd seen that video dozens, maybe thousands of times. It was one that his dad's old games before the rotator cuff injury. Chase knew what that video meant. His father was in one of his moods. He had an array of them, and none were good. A quick and quiet escape was Chase's best option. He made his way to the stairs. He locked himself in his bathroom and text Bex and puzzle over the weird, cryptic letter he'd received. He'd think about the furniture that was. They had to be better than his present. The first step groaned under his weight. "That you, son?" His father's voice boomed from the TV room, loud enough to be heard of the sounds of the game played long before Chase's birth. Chase bit back a curse. So much for sneaking by undetected. "Yeah, Dad," Chase said. "Just got home. Gotta get cracking on my homework." "Come here for a sec." Chase contemplated ignoring him, but he knew doing so would only make things worse. He went to the living room where he was greeted by a familiar sight. His father seated in the large recliner, the TV remote in one hand and a beer bottle in the other. His eyes were glued on the screen where much younger versions of himself, clad in the familiar maroon and leopard, carried a football to a game-winning touchdown. A plate sat on the table, empty save for a single stale pizza crust. Dinners at the Dovan household consisted primarily of pizza and boxed pasta. Tonight was a pizza night. Then again, the shouts wanted me, you know. Chase's father's jerked his chin at the TV screen. I was best on that team, and everybody knew it. Yes. Yeah, Chase said. Sighed, I know, Dad. His father took another swig of his beer. The stubble on his chin was a good 2 days' worth of growth. His hair speckled and a salt and pepper gray. Grab me another beer, will you? With a sigh, Chase went to the small kitchenette squished into the corner of their house. He had vague memories of the cards from the time before his mother walked out. She'd been fed up with his father drinking and the overall lack of ambition. She'd used to call Chase on his birthday, but the older he got, the more infrequent the calls became, and eventually they stopped altogether. He hadn't heard from her in almost 2 years. Sometimes he wondered if she was happy, wherever she was. Usually he tried not to think about it. 4 empty beer bottles sat in an uneven row at the counter. The one left in the fridge still had the plastic ring around it. It looked a little like a noose. Chase always tried to cut them before his father threw them out. He didn't want his dad's bad habits taking the life of an innocent fish or whatever body of water their trash would wound up. The bottle was cold against his palm. He rested the forehead against the closed refrigerated door. It was cold, too cold. That was cold, too. If he closed his eyes, you could imagine the kitchen looked the way it did years ago, before his mom left. Then there had been always a vase of freshly cut flowers on the kitchenette table, cut from the small garden in the backyard. There was always a bowl of fruit on the counter and a freshly baked loaf of bread on Sunday mornings, filling the house with a warm, welcoming aroma. When he opened his eyes, the kitchen remained as it always was. No flour, no fruit, no bread. The garden out back had succumbed to the wild growth of weeds. The garden, Chase wasn't particularly poetic, but the metaphor was obvious enough even for him. Beer in hand, he returned to the living room. His father was rewriting the tape to replay his touchdown. Chase handed the beer to his father, who twisted it open with a muttered, "Thanks, kid." Did you go to work today? Chase didn't want to ask, but he had to. He had to know how deep his father had dug them into this hole. His father answered by knocking back his beer, his eyes moved, glued to the screen. Eventually, he smoked for a while, came home early. That wasn't good. His father's many infractions at work had seen their family's average rating go from minimally respected to nearly bottom of the social barrel. They were lucky to have the house, but Chase knew that if his father's rating fell any lower, they would lose it. His scholarship was blessedly independent of his dad's ratings, but it would be hard to maintain his standing at Malapathrope, tenuous as it was, if they were forced out of their home. He'd heard stories about the shelters for the poorly rated. He didn't want to consider living in one. Chase didn't want to ask, but he felt like he had to. Did they fire you, Dad? His father merely grunted in response. What? Only then did his father look away from the screen. He looked older than 39 years. He'd been young when Chase was born. Both of his parents were. That was why they didn't last. His mother had been kind enough to tell him that before she left. What she didn't say was that she blamed Chase and his father for a stolen youth. She'd managed to deduce that all on his own. He didn't repeat his question. It wasn't safe. Not when his father looked and had that look in his eyes, a wild glint, like an animal backed into a corner ready to defend itself or attack, even if attack was an cold, ugly truth. The black eye left behind from the last truthful conversation he'd had with his father had faded just a few days before the start of school. Nothing, Dad. It's nothing. What's your attitude, Chase? I don't have an attitude, Dad. Chase ducked just in time to dodge an empty beer bottle his father threw at him. The bottle scattered as it hit the wall. A shard of broken glass caught his cheek. Chase gingerly touched his broken skin. His fingertips came away red with blood. Droplets of the beer trickled down the wall to rain the carpet. Chase stayed down, half kneeling, his heart hammering in his chest. The back of his neck was sticky with the beer. What did I tell you about talking back? To this, Chase said nothing. The question was rhetorical. Silence was the safer option. After a long moment, his father looked away, turning his attention back to the game. There, on the coffee table, sat his father's smartwatch. Chase wanted to look at it just to see how far the rating had fallen since that morning. Sometimes all it took was one bad day to make the difference between treading water and drowning. Icy tendrils of fear snaked their way through Chase's veins. His future had always been uncertain, but at least he thought he'd had one. With his own rating dropping below acceptable levels and his father out of a job, he wasn't sure he was going to do. He wasn't sure what he could do. They couldn't lose the house. They couldn't go homeless. Once a family's collective rating dropped below a certain point, it's almost impossible for them to claw their way back up. The construction crew was always looking for new blood. Chase could drop out of school, get a job with them. They could keep their home. But then his house would be all he ever had. No more baseball, no scouts, nothing beyond those four walls filled with memories Chase would rather forget. When it felt safe to move, Chase stood, brushing off his knees. He cleaned up the glass later, when his father was asleep. I'm going to do my homework, Chase said, though his father's attention had drifted away from him. As if he heard Chase speak, he gave no sign of it. It took everything Chase had not to stomp up the stairs and slam his bedroom door shut behind him. A curious heat stung at his eyes. He scrubbed at them, ashamed, even though there was no one around to see him do it. He grabbed a handful of tissues from a box on his bedside table and pressed into the wad of his cheek. The cut wasn't bleeding too badly, at least. It probably wouldn't scar, though it would be noticeable till it healed. If anyone asked about it, he'd do what he'd always do and come up with an excuse to explain the wounds. Cuts and scrapes were so commonplace on athletes, and Chase in particular, that no one ever really asked. With a weary sigh, Chase tossed off his sneakers and dropped his backpack on the floor by his bed. He sank into it, ignoring the lumpy springs and scratchy blankets. The bedroom hadn't changed much since Chase had started attending Malaprop after his athletic scholarship had lifted from his public school open to all, regardless of rating, to the ivory tower of private education. Last time Chase had given much thought to interior decoration had been deep into superhero comics. The evidence lingered in his walls as in the form of posters and wall scrolls of heroes he long since outgrown. The only sign that he changed was the navy blue blazer slung across the back of his desk chair. His phone buzzed. A text alert. He thought about ignoring it, but then he remembered Lucky's milkshakes, an exchange of numbers. A mysterious letter. Maybe it was Beck's. He rolled over, fumbling for his phone. It only took a few moments of rummaging for him to unearth it from a pile of his belongings. It wasn't Beck's. It was Steve, sending some dumb meme to the team's group chat. It wasn't Beck's, but he wanted it to be. That was a new and interesting feeling. Closing out of the chat app, he pulled up his contacts, scrolling until he found the list's latest edition. He stared at the number on the phone. Bex Johnson. Who knew he'd ever exchanged phone numbers with Bex frickin' Johnson? He wanted to text her, badly. He wanted to call her, to hear the sound of her voice through the phone, to tell her how the quality of his day had drastically plummeted since leaving the Lovekeep Penny. Talking about his feelings wasn't something he did. Talking about his feelings was something people did. Daytime talk shows and reality TV confessionals. He never really had anyone to talk to before. He wasn't particularly close to any guys on the team. They were friendly with one another. They shared sort of fraternity, but their brotherhood was too marked by the competition to allow for true friendships. The more games they played in, the higher their ratings, and ratings were everything. He clicked on Beck's name, then pulled up a new text window. He typed out a single word, hoping it was enough. Hey! It wasn't particularly clever, but it was a start. Bex Johnson, rating 90. Max pushed a single plate pea across her plate to join the small mound at the other end. Her parents' voices washed over her as they discussed the events of the day. Her mother was the chief neurosurgeon at Mongolia Children's Hospital, and her day had consisted of digging around in people's brains, rooting out malignant tumors, and repairing damaged spines. Her father was an aerospace engineer working on a government contract wrapping up in so many layers of top secret clearances that listening to him sometimes involved more redactions than information. Bex had no idea what it was he did at work or the nature of his project. All she knew about her dad, all she ever knew really, was that he was a rocket scientist with so many degrees that the string of letters after his name on academic papers was longer than the name itself. Bex hated peas. She'd always hated peas. She wasn't sure if either of her parents had the slightest idea, though. Her mother had never in Bex's lifetime so much boiled an egg in their own spacious kitchen, with its white granite Iceland and gleaming chromatic appliances. A housekeeper replaced every few years because of her father's impossibly ecstating standards repaired the family's meals. The new one, Marta, had not yet discovered that Bex hated peas, so they'd appear on her plate for the first time in years. Helena, the previous holder of the post, had discerned Bex's distaste after a single meal. Bex had never complained about peas, of course. Helena had simply observed that more had been pushed around the plate than delivered to Bex's mouth. "And how's your day, Rebecca?" Bex jerked her head up at the sound of her mother's voice. It lilted up at the end of her question in a way that implied she knew Bex hadn't been paying attention to the conversation and didn't appreciate it one bit. Her parents were looking at her. Her mom with a sharp gaze, her father with an expression that verged on boredom. He'd suggested on more than one occasion that the family dinner was a waste of time, but Bex's mother had insisted on the once-a-week tradition. Bex supposed it made her mother feel better about her otherwise abstinent style of parenting. Being a neurosurgeon was a time-consuming endeavor, after all. Bex didn't resent her for it. She had done once, when she was too young to understand the rigors of her mother's profession, but the years of the generally upbraided rough edges of Bex's abandonment, and now she barely felt the sting of her parents' absence. It tingled a bit when she prodded the old wound, so she avoided prodding it whenever she could. "My day was fine," Bex said, the same way she said it every night since family dinner had been a tradition in the 5th grade. Usually the one pithy sentence was good enough, but today there was something else in her mother's inquiring gaze. "Did anything interesting happen at school this week?" She had never asked Bex a follow-up question, not once. Not even when Bex was still 12 and had come home with a unfortunately uneven chin-length haircut performed by Melody in school's bathroom of Jackson Hills Middle School. Bex considered the answer. She remembered the garlish letters emblazoned on the doors, the worrisome content of the graffitied message. the taunt line of Joe Hugh's lips after he told her the lantern had been suspended until father noticed. No, ma'am, Bex said. She shoved a spoonful of peas into her mouth, forgetting for one brief moment of insanity how much she hated them. But if she was chewing peas, then she wasn't talking, and she wasn't sure what she would say to her parents about the graffiti. As Malaprothrope alumni, they both held this school in high esteem, and Bex knew they entertained no criticisms of things which they approved. Things of which they didn't approve were rarely, if ever, discussed within the walls of their own home. On the rare occasions when protesters made even evening news, her father would grab the remote without a wordless utterance of disgust to change the channel. The rating system had served the Johnson family well, and both her parents were staunch supporters. Difficult conversations were never for the on the menu for family dinner. They picked up topics that could be carried and discarded with ease. The weather, award-winning period films, the latest innovations in medical technology, what absurd modernist reimagining of classical operas were to be staged at the theater of which they were valued patrons. An act of vandalism, particularly the one that bled revolutionary sensibility, was hardly the sort of thing the Johnson family discussed. Bex's mother hummed thoughtfully. Bex had learned to hate the sound. It always meant her mother was about to make a comment that would grate at Bex's nerves. Dr. Rollins mentioned an unfortunate accident that occurred on the day of the first day of school. Apparently, some young delinquents saw fit to deface the school property with spray paint. Bex blinked, drew her piece extra slowly. I find it interesting that you didn't mention this to us earlier. Bex shrugged, though she knew her mother despised shrugging. I didn't think that was important. Her father made that same disgusted snort he normally reserved for people with political views that failed to align with his own. You'd think someone would be teaching these kids respect, especially with what we pay into tuition, Bix's mother tisked. One would think, darling, her eyes, the same dark brown as her daughter's, bore into Bex's own. All their features were similar, the high cheekbones, the same dark brown skin, the same thick curls, although her mother's were perpetually tamed in a slight bun. Bex could probably count on one hand of the number of times she'd seen her mother's hair loose and free. I'm sure you wouldn't know a thing about it, but you heard something, I hope. You'll remember your responsibility to report it. I don't know anything about it, Bex insisted, which was true. Her mother hummed around a dainty mouthful of steak so raw it might be breathing. She always did like her steak bloody. Bex couldn't understand how, since her mother spent much of her day looking at raw red goop of the human body. Perhaps the artist friend of yours knows something. The tone of her mother's voice implied much even when her words relayed so little. Her name's Melody, Mum, Bex said, more to her peas than to anyone at the table. They didn't approve of artists or actors or anyone who made their career anything that couldn't be neatly qualified as medicine, science, or law. Those were the only respectful areas of expertise as far as Mr. and Mrs. Johnson were concerned. Like many of their social rank, being seen to show appreciation for the arts was no impediment to looking down at actual artists. Under her breath, Bex added, "You've known her since we were like 6, and she doesn't know anything either." "Don't say like," her father interjected. "It makes you sound hesitant." "Can't have that," Bex muttered once more to her peas. "What was that?" "Nothing." Her mother's knife scraped against her plate. "Well, enough of that unpleasantness. Have I mentioned the new internship opening up at the hospital?" Bex moved on, mushing her mashed potatoes with her fork. She actually did like mashed potatoes, but every time her parents brought up a new extracurricular opportunity to add to her resume, her stomach felt like it was calcifying in stone. She thought back to the schedule she'd made, her crowded sympathy of color coding. She'd even colored the hours she marked off for sleeping, unnecessary for humans, but a weakness among the Johnsons. "No," Bex replied, "you haven't mentioned it. The internship could be a great opportunity for you." Bex's mother's gaze said, her gaze already back on her steak. Bex's agency in decisions like these were normal at best. Normally it's only open to college students, but I'm sure I can put in a good word for you when you submit your application. Not if Bex submitted her application, but when. Her parents' participation was foregone conclusion as far as her parents were concerned. The calendar flashed through her mind again with its paucity of empty blank spaces. Every moment of her day was already accounted for. "I don't know, Mom." "What is there to know? It's a great opportunity, Rebecca. Her classmates would kill for a chance like this. Think of what we could do for rating. College applications are due in a few months," her father added, as if Bex could forget. The prospects of those applications had been hanging over her like a dark cloud since the first day of her freshman year at the Malapathrope. Don't say just. It makes you sound unsure. Bex fought not to roll her eyes, but her father's eyebrow of thickness of which was one of his few facial features Bex had inherited, twitched as if he could see the desire to do so written across her skin. She had to say something, to outright refuse without a solid reason would to invite more of their persistent pushing until she found herself shoved right to the edge of her sanity. "I don't know I have time. I started tutoring a new kid at school," and before they could protest, she added, "The headmaster asked me specifically." "Oh," her mother said, "and who is this lucky student who gets to occupy your time?" "His name is Chase. He plays baseball." Her parents shared a juvenile laugh. "An athlete," her mother chuckled. "No wonder he needs extra help." More brawn than brains, I take it. The question made Bex bristle. The instant intensity of her annoyance took her by surprise. Hearing her parents say less generous things about people who they deemed intellectually inferior wasn't anything new, but hearing them say something about Chase, who clearly wanted help but didn't know how to ask for it, felt particularly cruel. He's a good guy, Mom. She wasn't sure if that was definitely true, but it felt true. He just struggles a little, that's all. Her father pointed a fork at her. Keep her professional, Bex. Now's hardly the time to let you get distracted by boys. Dad, I'm just tutoring him. Be that as it may, her mother said, I don't see why you can't both tutor him and take on the internship. Sure, Mom. It's just that I don't think I have time on to add another extracurricular activity to my schedule. There are only so many hours in a day, you know. The sounds of utensils on china made it a very delicate halt. Honey, her mother began, blinking at her daughter like she sprouted a second head. Don't sound so deficit. 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 It's meant for full-time students, so only an hour or two a day, once a week. It's something worth doing. You'll find the time. How? Excuse me? Bex let her fork fall to her plate. The clatter sound and the silence were elegantly appointed dining room. The decor was work of an interior designer who had decided that a cold modernist style had suited the collective disposition of the Johnson family. How do I find time? The Becks were out of Bex's mouth before she could swallow them back. And how do I add 2 hours to the day? Who am I to talk to about making an even 26? It was the most she had ever talked back to her parents in her 17 years. She didn't know when the capacity to do so had come from. Every day she bottled up her frustrations, her exhaustion, her fears that nothing she did would ever be good enough. Their expectations made her feel, and now that bottle was spilling over, too full to contain one drop more. Rebecca Lee Johnson. Her mother bit out each word with razor's sharp precision. I don't think I appreciate your tone. From the corner of her eye, Bex noticed her father's hand flying to her own wrists. He tapped his screen a few times, and Bex's watch buzzed. He docked her. Her own dad had sent her a negative. Don't talk to your mother like that, he said, his tone inviting no farther rebellions, however minor. And just like that, the indignation had bubbled to the surface of Beck's being, like a can of soda fizzed out of existence. She slouched in her seat, feeling dwarfed by the high-backed leather chair, and the table was just a touch too large for 3 people to comfortably eat around. I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't mean it. It was a long day at school, and I'm just kind of tired. Tired didn't quite cover it. Don't say kind of. Her father chided about around a generous mouthful of steak. Not now, Albert, Bex's mom snapped. Bex stared at the disaster zone on her own plate. It looked like a hurricane had assaulted the mountain of potato and peas, leaving a naught but devastation in its wake. May I please be excused? Her mother remained silent for a moment, as if considering withholding her permission. Eventually she relented. Yes, you may. Difficult conversations were, after all, hardly appropriate for the family weekly dinners. Bex pushed away from the table, leaving two-thirds of her meal uneven, if not untouched. The hunger would hit her later, when she was lying in bed rearranging the colorful rectangles of her schedule to do the impossible. Bex's room was a testament to her achievement, or overachievement, as Melody would like to see. Ribbons dominated the wall above her desk, and an array of mostly blue told her multiple victories in science fairs over the years. Trophies weighed down her bookshelves, blocking the view to most of the spines of them. Every time she wanted to pull a book off the shelf, Bex had to rearrange the entire display. The desk itself was hidden under a pile of textbooks and binders and notebooks. Most of her work at school was done digitally on her tablet or at the computer consoles provided by the school. She found studying more effective when she opted for old-fashioned pen and paper. Normally she would have gone straight to the desk to get started on the piles of homework, but the sick feeling she had through dinner had yet to abate. She passed by the desk and belly flopped on her bed, burying her face in the pillow. Max screamed, just a little scream, not even to be overheard by her mother's eagle ears, not enough to dissipate the growing length of anxiety coiling itself around her organs. The vibration sounded by her nightstand. She angled her face just in time to see her phone light up through the curtain of her curls. The only person who ever texted her was Melody, and Bex wasn't quite sure she was in the mood to deal with the girl's incessant optimism. But Bex was nothing if not a good friend. She snaked out a hand to grab the phone. Her fingers paused in sliding open the screen lock when she saw the sender. Chase Dovin. A boy was texting her. Chase Dovin, who was, in fact, a boy, texting her at night. Such a thing seemed ridiculous, so ludicrous that she hadn't really thought it would ever happen. She had given him her number at Lucky's, but the logistics of planning a strenuous academic regimen had distracted her enough for the implications, and now a boy was texting her. Bex pressed the phone to her chest and made a sound that was somewhere between a wheeze and a giggle. After a moment of indulgence, she was allowed that much, surely. She bit the inside of her cheek hard enough to kill any future wheeze giggles. Get it together, Johnson. She got it together. Then she swiped the message open. Hey. What, that's it? Bex asked the silence of her bedroom. The silence did not respond. Melody had always told Bex that were like that. As someone with a fair share of suitors, a fact Bex's mother hardly disapproved of. Melody would know that what boys were like far better than Bex. But knowing what they were like that, and experiencing how like that they were felt two entirely different things. What did one say to a simple regular hey? Like reading that like that placed the burden of conversation direction on the recipient, and that was incredibly unfair. But responding to another with another hey felt uninspired at best and passive aggressive at worst. Bex stared at the screen, wishing she'd listened to Melody's blathering about her romantic expectides instead of tuning her out with a well-timed hums and you don't say's. If she had, maybe she'd know what to do. She thought of texting Melody to ask for advice. Doing so, she would have to explain how she came to have Chase Dovan's number in the first place, and if she was tutoring him, then maybe there was no reason to be nervous. They had communicate said tutoring, and there was nothing untoward in that. But it wasn't just tutoring, Beck suspected. She thought back to the letter and the smiling gesture and the immediate camaraderie in the discovery had caused. They shared a secret, and Bex wasn't about to invite a third party into that secret. Not yet. Not when it had the potential to be so volatile. She typed out and then deleted a series of greetings, each one less satisfactory than the last. Hi there, heya, solutions, sup, ugh. Bex was disgusted with herself. She could solve the theorems that brought the mathematical professors to tears, but she couldn't figure out what to say to a guy. It hadn't occurred to her that Chase could see the blinking dots of her aborted typing adventures until he sent a follow-up into his absolutely incredible hi. Any thoughts on what that letter meant? Oh, thank God. Bex breathed a sigh of relief. He offered an actual conversation thread to follow. She could work with that. Bex pulled her laptop over and launched her browser. The computer was usually on the bed since she fell asleep with it every night. That habit probably said something utterly damning about her physiological state, but it was also probably best left unexamined. Let me do a search if I can figure something out, she typed back. You want me to send you a pic? No, Bex said aloud. She knew enough about cell phones to know nothing that was stored on them or transmitted with them was ever truly private. That he typed you instead of you should have bothered her, but it didn't. It bugged her so much when Melody did it that she'd spend an entire summer breaking her best friend out of that habit. Another thing best left unexamined. I think I can remember what it said. I can call you. Bex wondered briefly if this was what a heart attack felt like. Sitting with him at a Lucky's had been different. They'd gone there under authentic school-related reasons, but the letter had nothing to do with school, and the thought of talking on the phone with a real living human boy while her parents watched the evening news downstairs felt unspeakably indignant. She found she quite liked the feeling. Okay, she typed one word. a multitude of feelings. Less than a minute later, her phone rang. She let it ring 2 times before answering. She remembered that much from Melody's lessons on in how to be a normal teenage girl who did normal teenage things. Keep 'em wanting more, Melody said, never answered before the third ring. Max tried, but you can only make it so far. Hello? It came out as both a question and a squeak. Max wanted to sink into her mattress and die, suffocated by a memory foam. Hey! Bex's voice sounded different on the phone, deeper, like maybe he was lying down. So many strokes of genius. Bex leaned against her pillows and propped her laptop on her thighs. She typed the words of the rhyme into Google, but none of the hits looked promising. Nope. I don't know if the internet is gonna help out on this one. Chase hummed in Beck's ear. It seemed sent an electronic current of diligent down her spine. Weird, Chase said. Super weird, Bex agreed. Maybe we just need to sleep on it. There was a rustling again against the phone like he was changing positions. Don't think about him wiggling around on his bed, Bex thought. Do not. Yeah, she said. Maybe. Are you okay? He said. You sound a little, I don't know, strained. I'm fine, Bex said, even though she wasn't. Not really. My parents are driving me nuts. Chase puffed a little laugh against the phone. I know that feeling. You can talk about something else if you want. The floorboards on the hall outside Bex's room creaked. Bex, honey, are you talking to someone? No, Mom, Bex called, much quieter, she added. I've got to go. I'm really sorry. Hey, no worries. Bex was Bex was probably imagining it, but she thought he sounded a little sad. Talk tomorrow? Yeah, Bex whispered into her home. Talk tomorrow. She hung up. The rest of the night the sound of Chase Dovan's secret laugh into the phone echoed in her mind. Javi Lucero, rating 88. The boy with the camera had become the boy with the note. Noah, Javi whispered to himself as he sunned on a large slab of rock outside Malapatrop. Eighth period had just let out, and the students spilled out the doors as he watched them from a comfortable distance. The lingering warmth of the summer had fled, but the afternoon sun was persistent enough to warm the stone. He understood why cats fell asleep in sunbeams, even if everything outside that small speck of light was cold. At least his one spot was warm. They hadn't talked about the note. The bell had rung, signaling the end of the period. Noah had shoved it back into his bag and vacated the bathroom as fast as his legs could carry him. Javi followed him out. But by then, Noah had been swallowed by the crowd of students heading to their classes. Javi hadn't had much luck tracking Noah down after that. They shared no classes, and more often than not, the boy left the school the second the eighth period bell rang. He didn't linger to hang out with friends, as far as Javi could tell. Noah didn't have any at Malapatrop, and he didn't stick around for extracurriculars. But Javi wasn't sure where Noah went every day in such a rush. But he wanted to learn. There was so much Javi wanted to learn, like why Noah had received a message signed by a jester. His obsession was so intense that he didn't even feel the wonderful thrill he normally did when his rating crawled upward. The Panthera headsets had proven so popular they had to go into another production run to meet customer demand, but it was hard to focus on when his brain was so determined to look elsewhere. Javi watched groups form and disperse as students left for whatever activities they had planned for the afternoon. Some went straight home, the underachievers, children of highly rated individuals who didn't need to boost their own ratings with every activity Malapathrup had to offer. On the steps, Summer Rollins held court, flanked by two strapping young men in maroon leather jackets. She looked genuinely regal, as if they were her honor guard. It wasn't lost on Javi. It wasn't lost on Javi that she sat on the top step, her minions all at least one step below. He beat it. He bet it wasn't lost on them either. His eyes roved over the crowd until they found the mop of dark brown hair he was looking for. Noah, he said again, the name carried by the wind. He stretched his legs and looked around, and stood, reluctant as he was to relinquish the spot of warmth he claimed he had business to attend to. Making his way through the crowd of departing students took a little finessing. Javi had a reputation as someone who was both highly rated and highly approachable. He dispensed a few smiles, a wink here or there, and a pat on a shoulder or two, and then he reached Noah. The boy was standing on the fringes of the lawn, close to the parking lot, his head bent over his phone. He was frowning. A small line had formed before his eyebrows, and Javi had to tuck his hands into his pockets of his Panthera track jacket to still the urge to reach out and smooth that little wrinkle. Got a hot date? Javi asked. Noah jumped, his phone slipping through his grasps. Javi darted out a hand to catch it before it smashed against the pavement. What? No. Hi. What? Noah was cute when he was flustered. Javi found he rather liked flustering him. Hi, Javi said. Hi, Javi said. You busy? The boy's eyes, a nice soft brown, widened. Why? Javi couldn't help but laugh. No need to sound so suspicious. I was thinking about going to the Lucky's, and I hate drinking alone. You wanna come? Drinking? Milkshakes. Duh. Come on. My treat. Are you asking me on a date? Noah asked. His perplexed face was almost as good as his flustered face. Is this a date? Javi offered him one shouldered shrug. You want it to be? I don't know, Noah replied, a little too honestly. Okay, well, how about we start walking over to the Lucky's and you can figure it out on the way. Noah remained standing there, brow furrowed. For a horrible moment, Javi thought the boy would say no, that he would prove himself one of the few people at Malapathrup immune to Javi's charm. I was supposed to see my sister, Noah began, but she's busy. The sound that sounded odd, but Javi did impress, and he wouldn't not until he had a satisfactory answer to his question. So how about the milkshakes? A prolonged silence, then okay, Noah said. But why? Why what? Why are you asking me to get milkshakes with you? Javi tugged on Noah's sleeve as he steered them toward the grates. Lucky's wasn't that far, but it was far enough to have a considerable chat before getting there, and along the way there would be nothing but tree-lined streets to bracket them in. No one but squirrels hoarding nuts for the coming winter to overhear them. Because you seem cool, Javi said. He was keenly aware of the whispers following them off campus. They must have made an odd couple to see. Lonely, no, lone, lone, lonely loner Noah and gracious gamer Javi walking off almost arm in arm. I don't think anyone's ever referred to me as cool before. Noah said, his steps falling into sync with Javi's. Stop. Are you going to make me cry? Noah chuckled a little, some of the heaviness evaporating from him as Javi tugged him along toward Lucky's and milkshakes too thick to suck through a straw and, most importantly, answers. The lucky penny was a was as packed as it was whatever school let out. A handful of townies sat in the long counter, but most inhabitants of Jackson Hills knew to give a place a wide berth from the hours of 3 and 5. Malapathorpe students, one let off their leashes, were boisterous at best and extremely obnoxious at worst. Finding a table in the late afternoon required either murder or a bribe. Fortunate enough, though, had Fortune, though, had decided to smile on them that day. A small booth in the corner, barely large enough for two fully grown young men, was unoccupied. Javi tossed a smile at the waitress, who followed them to the table with two glossy menus. They ordered the milkshake of the day, orange creamsicle, and Javi added a side of fries for good measure. Noah still hadn't come to a decision on the dateness of their outing, but if it was a date, Javi didn't want Noah to think he was too cheap to buy him solid food. So, Javi said, I have questions. Noah's eyebrow inched upward. Is this some kind of interrogation? I thought it was a date. Javi bit his lips to prevent himself from shouting in triumph. Good thing he got the fries. The photograph, Javi said, leaning over the table. The note, the gesture. What did it say? Oh, that. Noah fished around in his backpack until he found the photograph. It was crumpled from having been unceremoniously stuffed into his bag, and he had to smooth it out on the table to flatten it. It's a picture I took, freshman year, on the first day of school, Noah said. I don't know how someone could have gotten their hands on it, though. On the date of the Prophet Falls, Javi read, one mustn't dance a forbidden waltz, a copper found and a fortune told, all beside a box of gold. Noah looked down at the words as if he could coax a greater, clearer meaning from them if he stared hard enough. It didn't seem to work. I have no clue what it is about. You don't know why someone would have sent it to you? Javi asked. Noah shrugged and shook his head. No idea. He cocked his head to the side as if studying Javi. Is that why you asked me to come here? One of the reasons. Yeah. Javi slipped his phone from his pocket and pulled up the camera roll. Because someone sent me this online. He held out the phone. Javi Noah's eyes widened as he accepted it. The picture wasn't great. Fuzzy. Faint. Lines cut across the image. The type of distortion that occurred when you took a picture from a picture on another glowing screen, but the image of the jester was close enough. The text was so a little hard to read, but it was legible enough. Wait, what? Noah's eye started from the screen to Javi and back again. You don't know who sent this to you? Javi shook his head. Not the faintest. That's weird, said Noah. Incredibly so. Javi agreed. I was hoping maybe you'd have some answers, but I guess the search continues. The waitress returned, her tray laden with two large milkshakes and an obscenely generous serving of fries. They waited in silence as she laid them on the table. When she was gone, Noah picked up a fry but didn't eat it. You said there were other reasons, Noah began, why you asked me here. Javi also took a fry, and he wasted no time popping it into his mouth. He chewed, mulling over how he wanted to play this. It wasn't a game, but there was strategy involved. One had to know when to advance and when to hold the line. He hadn't even been certain that Noah liked guys, but judging from the way from the other boys' casual acceptance of the maybe date, that didn't seem to be a problem. Still, Noah was a skittish creature. Noah didn't want to scare him off. I just wanted to hang out, Javi said. With me? Noah asked. Yes, with you, Javi replied with a little laugh. Is that so hard to believe? Noah shrugged. Kind of. He finally raised the fry to his lips and nibbled on the end. But I'm not complaining. A smile stretched its way across Javi's lips. Not a planned one. Not the trademark grin that adorned posters selling Panther gaming peripherals, but a genuine one, the rarest kind. I've been trying to track you down for ages, but you were slippery, like an eel, hard to catch. Javi dipped a fry into his milkshake. His siblings claimed dipping fries into anything other than ketchup was a disgusting habit, but Javi thought it made a good food great. I was starting to feel like you were avoiding me. I wasn't, Noah said, and then immediately, okay, I kind of was. The milkshake dripped dipped fry was far too sweet on Javi's tongue. Oh? It wasn't personal, Noah said in a rush. It was just me being forgotten. Forget it. It's dumb. Curiosity was one of Javi's greatest sins. Sometimes he couldn't help but poke at things. The more stubborn his target, the better. If it wasn't about me, then what was it? It's stupid, Noah insisted. Great. I love stupid. That got a little smile out of Noah, which in turn got a little smile out of Javi. I was embarrassed, Noah mumbled. I hated that you saw me crying. I don't like crying in front of people. No shame in tears, Javi said. It was what he told his younger siblings whenever they cried, because it was what his parents had told him when he cried. Can I ask what happened? The breath left Noah in a sad, shallow sigh. My sister's sick. Oh, Javi said. I'm sorry to hear that. He wasn't good at knowing what to say in situations like this. He felt like he was parroting the words of an older, wiser adult, more accustomed to these sorts of conversations. Like, really sick. Noah went on. She's been in the hospital for a while now. She, needs a donor. For what? Javi asked. Bone marrow. Noah replied. Oh, yep. Javi didn't know much about terminal illness, but he knew enough. He knew that finding donors for kids was really hard, and finding bone marrow for anyone was really hard. People stayed in their registry for years until they died and was too late. Some until they died when it was too late. I went to get tested to see if I was a match. Noah paused. He swirled the straw around the milkshake once, twice, but his hand fell away before taking a sip. Javier hazarded a guess. You weren't? A thin, bitter laugh escaped from Noah. Nope. Not only I wasn't a match, I wasn't even. He let this sentence linger without finishing. You weren't even what? Javi asked. Related. We're not even related. Javi blinked. What? I'm adopted, Noah said. We didn't have the same blood type. Jeez, Javi said. That didn't seem like the ideal way for someone to find out. So, yeah. Not only am I not a donor, I'm not even her brother. Javi shook his head. Hey, being adopted doesn't mean you're not her brother. I know. Noah took a sip of his milkshake and then cringed. That's a crap ton of sugar. Yeah, that's the beauty of it, Javi said. Listen, have you talked to your parents about this? Noah shook his head. No, we don't really talk about stuff. Not deep stuff like that, anyway. When we do, it's usually about Cree, Cece. I don't want to burden them anymore. But they're your parents. You wouldn't be burdening them. And if you are, well, them bearing your burdens is sort of their duty. It's their job. It's the job description. Trust me, I checked. The corner of Noah's lips twitched. It didn't evolve into a fully developed smile, but it was a good start. I just. Noah leaned back against the booth seat. The red vinyl creaked as he moved against it. I don't know what to say. Hey, Mom. Hey, Dad. You weren't ever planning on telling me I was adopted? Or were you just hoping I never find out? I think it's probably worth bringing up. How do you talk to your parents about stuff like this? Well, two things. One, I wasn't adopted, Javi said. My parents had me the old-fashioned way, by accident. Noah smiled at that. And two, both of my parents are dead. And just like that, the smile was wiped off Noah's face, like someone had just pulled an eraser across it. Crap. I'm sorry. Crap. Javi held up a hand to still the apologies, but he could sense were ready to pour out of Noah's mouth on a wave of regret. It's fine. Don't worry about it. Really. Look, I don't even know what your relationship with your parents is like, but maybe it's worth talking to them about this. Maybe. Noah stared into the swirling froth of his milkshake as if it had all the answers, if only. There's nothing I wouldn't give to be able to talk to my mom and dad just one more time. Jeffy felt himself going too deep, getting too real. But there was something about Noah that made him want to dive in. There was an incredible sense of catharsis that came from sharing these things. Sometimes I worry that I'll forget what their voices sounded like. That the voices I think I remember are actually just my imagination. Something my brain just made out to fill the blanks. It was the first time Javi had ever said that to another human being. He never dared talk like this with his siblings, and the eldest, it was his duty to bear the burden of remembrance, and his grandmother, losing her son and daughter-in-law, had affected her in ways Javi knew he couldn't ever fully fathom. Noah's hand relinquished the straw. His palm hovered over the table as if he was reaching out to touch Javi's, but he dropped it before making contact. Well, that makes my dumb issues sound small and insignificant. What? No, that's not what I. Javi ran a hand through his hair. I wasn't trying to say my problems were bigger than yours. I just meant. He heaved a sigh. You don't know. Your parents are human sometimes. Humans mess up. But you're still your parents. You know that. No matter what. I know that, Noah said. His eyes drifted away from Javi's, wandering to the rest of the dinner. Javi followed his gaze. It felt as though their table had been carved from the room, like they'd made a pocket dimension for themselves amid the afternoon chaos. In a booth by the front windows, a table full of what looked like mathletes hunched over books and calculators, a clutch of freshman girls broke into a riot of giggles when a couple of sophomore boys walked past their table and smiled at one of them. I don't think I'm angry at them, said Noah. Not really. Javi turned back to him. Noah's gaze was still off into their side, but Javi had the feeling that Noah wasn't really looking at the other dozens other at the dinner. Other dozens of the diner. You aren't angry that they didn't tell you? Yeah, but Noah scrubbed a hand over his face. In that moment he looked older than his years. I'm not angry at them. I'm just angry. I'm angry because my little sister is sick and I can't help her. I'm her brother. It's supposed to be my job to protect her, and if I can't protect her from this, I'm angry and I don't know who to be angry at. It's easier to be angry about this. I get that, Javi said, and can I just say, this got way more cathartic than I planned. Noah's lips trembled, and then he laughed, a nice full-bodied sound. It softened the lips lines on his face and made the golden flecks of his eyes sparkle. The last bit may have been inventions of Javi's imagination, but that was nice, neither here nor there. You mean you didn't spill your guts to everyone you take out for fries and a shake? Noah asked. And get them to do the same? No, not really. Might add it to the rapport, though, seeing how it worked so well. Javi smiled at Noah over the rim of his glasses as he lifted the straw to his lips. Thanks, Noah said. I don't think I realized how much I needed to talk about this. Yeah, Javi agreed. Me too. But what I really wanted to know, Noah asked, leaning over the table, is who sent us these notes. They had no idea who sent the notes. They racked their brains, demolished a second round of shakes, that Javi was beginning to deeply regret, and still they hadn't the faintest idea of who sent them the notes. The bigger question also remained unanswered. Why? By the time the waitress hustled them out of the Lucy's, claiming they need claiming they needed the table, they were no closer to the answers than they had than when they sat down. Javi walked Noah to the bus stop, where they were forced to go their separate ways. As Noah's bus pulled up, Javi grabbed his arm to stop him. Wait a sec. Javi tapped on his smartwatch, pulling up Noah's rating page. He tapped the plus sign next to Noah's name. Almost immediately, Noah's own watch vibrated. He smiled when he looked down at the notification of a positive peer-to-peer rating. What is that for? What's this for? Noah asked. Javi pushed Noah toward his bus. If he didn't get on it soon, it would leave without him. I like you. That's what it's for. Javi skipped away from him so he wouldn't have the last word. There was nothing more satisfying than that. He was walking toward his own bus stop when a buzz against his wrist, not 2 minutes later, made him stop in his tracks. A peer-to-peer rating from one Noah Rayner, a positive one. Javi smiled the entire ride home. Tamsin Moore, rating 26. Master Wood's lecture echoed in Tamsin's mind, even with the weirdness of the Tartar card crowding most of her other thoughts. She'd been so distracted by both events she nearly brushed her teeth with sit cream that morning. That she had actually woken up early enough to get to school on time before the morning assembly, even, might have also contributed to her wandering thoughts. But it was morning, and school was in season, and she was actually seriously, legitimately considering attending her classes. Most of them, anyway. Her smartwatch buzzed as she reached her locker. It felt like it had been buzzing all morning. She bit back a curse, glancing down at her wrist. Her rating had slid again. Prohibitory. Precariously, and for no reason Tamsin could discern. She was trying to be good, honestly, but the numbers kept falling and falling, and the device buzzing on her nightstand, even in the middle of night, and she had no idea why. Tamsin had barely opened her locker before it was slammed shut again. She yanked her hand out of the way before it could meet its unfortunate end. What the? Why did you put this in my notebook? Tamsin turned to see a very angry Hannah waving a folded note in her face. A torn sticker marked the place where it had been held closed. Her hair was muzzed in the way that seemed unusual for the normally so put together Hannah Samoto. Her eyes making her look more tired than a 17-year-old had any right to look. She had a heavy duffel bag slung over her shoulder, in addition to her backpack, skates, mostly likely. You look terrible, Tamsin said. Also, hi. Why are you angrily wielding a piece of paper at me? Hannah waved the note from the renewed fervor. You put this creepy note into my notebook. What are you talking about? This! Hannah thrust the note into Tamsin's face, a hair breadth away from her nose. I'm talking about this! Tamsin placed a hand on Hannah's wrist and gently but insistently pushed the other girl's arm down. I have no idea what you are talking about. The bell rang. They both jumped. Tamsin hadn't even noticed the halls were emptying. The moments just before the bell were usually a cacophony of frenzied footsteps as students rushed to their classes, lest their ratings reflect their tardiness. Ugh, Tamsin said. Classes. Hannah frowned. I thought you didn't go to class. Tamsin shrugged. Her book bag was a lot heavier now. She was putting actual books in it. I'm turning over a new leaf. And just like that, an indignant steam had just powered Hannah up to that point, vocated her body. She deflated in slow motion. So, you didn't put this in my notebook? No, Tamsin said. I told you. I didn't read your diary. It's not a diary, Hannah said defensively. Okay, whatever. I didn't read your not diary. A vibration against her wrist summoned a swear to Tamsin's lips. Hannah's device must have buzzed as well because she glared down at her wrist with what looked like betrayal. Hannah swore, and then slapped her hand on her mouth as Tamsin's eyebrows arched in pleased disbelief. The Ice Princess curses, said Tamsin. Who knew? I don't, Hannah protested. Well, you just did, and not gonna lie, it made me like you a little bit more. Wait, you not like me? Did you not like me very much before? Are we losing track of what this oddly aggressive conversation was about? Hannah glanced down at the paper in her hand, then at her watch. Tamsin, amused, the display showed what her own would, a point lost for lateness. Listen, Tamsin said. We've already been docked for not showing up on time. We're already screwed. And I want to know what this weirdness you're accusing me of. So why don't we just skip? Old habits were hard to break. Tamsin would be sure to tell Wood of that next time he called her into his office. Skip. Yeah, skip. Skip where? Students found roving the halls of Malaprothrope when they were supposed to be in class were routinely rounded up and sent to wherever they were supposed to be, but not Tamsin. I know a place. She liked it that way. Sounds mysterious when she said it like that. Hannah paused, sagging under the weight of her bags. The vivid energy she'd brought up to Tamsin's lockers dispersed into the ether. What about turning over a new leaf? Hannah asked. Tomorrow's a new day. Tamsin took Hannah by the arm, steering the other girl to the stairwell nearest her locker. There was a fire exit a flight down with a disabled smoke alarm that no one had bothered to fix since the last time Tamsin had disabled it. She had beginning to think the faculty's staff was slowly but surely being ground down under the heel of her stubbornness. It was strange, bringing someone to the place she'd begin to think of as her secret lair. A childish notion as it was. She saw people there, but they weren't friends. They were clients, and none of them seemed to want to be there. They went to Hampson for a reason, and once she'd served her purpose, They departed as quickly as their feet could carry out of them, darkening the building and the sunlit halls, far away from the Witch of Malapatha. But Hannah wasn't here for the exchange of funds and servant services. She was here on invitation. And that was something Tamsin had never extended to anyone, ever. As they slipped past the shoddy lockers that provided only superficial discouragement from the potential intruders, Tamsin glanced at Hannah. The other girl had never been to this building. She wasn't one of Tamsin's regulars, and had never gone to her for a reading. They never exchanged words before that day in the shop, yet here they were, staring something truly bizarre, as if they'd been friends for years. It was a strange feeling. But Tamsin found she didn't quite hate it. Hannah looked around at the dilapidated furnishings and the cobwebs dangling in the corners. The motes of dust danced in the slanting sunlight. "This is nice," she said. "It's not, but thanks for saying so." Tamsin made her way to the stairs, motioning for Hannah to follow. "Come on. There's a room upstairs where I do tarot readings that's almost cozy." She clomped up the steps, her heavy boots pounding out the little clouds of dust. When she got to the landing, she turned just in time to see Hannah sway, her weight carrying her back. Hannah's hand groped for the banister, but there wasn't one. It had fallen off years before, left to rot with the rest of the building. Tamsin grabbed Hannah's jacket and yanked her forward onto the landing. Hannah collided with Tamsin, her body sagging forward. She righted herself quickly, but Tamsin kept a steadying hand on the other girl's arm. "Sorry," Hannah said, looking down to the side anywhere but at Tamsin. "I just got a little dizzy." "Yeah, I noticed." Tamsin guided her to the room at the far end of the hall. There were at least 2 cushions there to break any more unexpected falls. When they arrived, Hannah sank into one of them, folding on herself with enough grace to make it look more intentional than it probably was. Tamsin watched her move. Her breath seemed labored, more than it ought to be, considering the girl was some kind of world-class athlete. Walking up a flight of stairs shouldn't take the wind out of her like that. Tamsin wasn't even breathing heavily, and she didn't even exercise. "Are you okay?" Tamsin asked, though it was obvious the other girl wasn't. But it felt polite to phrase it as a question instead of an accusation. "Yeah," Hannah lied smoothly, like she'd grown accustomed to doing. "I'm fine." Tamsin lowered herself into a cushion next to Hannah, the tarot card and the strange note pushed into the far corners of her mind. She looked at Hannah, really looked at her. Hannah was small and thin, which wasn't entirely surprising given the sport in which she participated, but it wasn't a lithe sort of thin. The wrists that poked out of Hannah's puffer jacket were bony, the skin so thin and pale stretched over them that Tamsin could see the fine tracery of veins under it in alarming detail. The collarbone that Tamsin spied between the open throat of Hannah's jacket was equally worrisome. She was all harsh lines and flat planes. Her muscles seemed to tremble with the exertion of holding her skeleton together. Hannah was not fine. "So, the other day of the shop." "In the shop," Tamsin said, not sure if it was the right thing to say, but knowing she had to say something. "That wasn't the first dizzy spell you've had, was it?" Hannah's skeletal hands retreated into the safety of her sleeves, her fingers poking out just enough to pick at the cuffs. No, and she shook her head to get the bangs off her face and abruptly stilled, like the motion was getting too much for her brain to handle. But it's not a big deal. It's just a thing that happens sometimes. You know it shouldn't, right? Tamsin felt the conversation had hovering on a pre, Prius, precipice, precipice of what she wasn't sure, but she was beginning to suspect. Hannah didn't answer. Instead, she thrusted her hands into her pockets, pulling at the note she waved in front of Tamsin so menacingly a few minutes prior. How's this super weird note, huh? Hannah? Only then did Hannah look up into Tamsin's eyes. The rest of her was still, but her eyes had a wild look of a caged animal, something trapped that didn't know how to escape. What? You haven't eaten anything today. The Tamsin The question sat heavy in the air between them. They both knew the answer, but it wasn't about the right answer. It was how they handled the lie that they both knew was coming. Yeah, after practice. Tamsin nodded. Pushing wouldn't do any good. The harder she pushed, the farther Hannah would retreat in the cocoon of her own suffering. Tamsin was surprised by the relaxation, that she didn't want Hannah to retreat from her. Okay, Tamsin said, even though it wasn't another lie, but a necessary one in a moment. Okay, just checking. Hannah pushed the note towards Tamsin. If you didn't put this in my notebook, I don't know who did. Nobody touches that book but me. Tamsin folded up the half-formed conversation about Hannah's eating habit and set it aside. They could deal with it when they were both better equipped, when their friendship felt less like a possibility and more like of a certainty. Friendship, not a thing. Not a thing Tamsin had actively courted in at Lopathrop, but something that she was starting to think she might like to develop. Odd. What does it say? Tamsin said. Hannah opened the letter, laying it on the flat on the floor between them. On the day this prophet false, Hannah recited, one mustn't dance a forgotten waltz, a copper found and a fortune told, all beside a box of gold. This is where it gets interesting. Tamsin rummaged in her backpack to retrieve the tarot card she found taped to her locker. She placed the card beside Hannah's letter. The text of Hannah's had been culled from various magazines, judging from the various fonts of the paper textures. Holy, you got one too? Hannah leaned closer to inspect the card, squinting at the tiny font. When? Where? Hannah Tamsin shrugged. A few days ago. Someone taped it to my locker. Hannah sat back. On your locker? Anyone could have grabbed it there. I was the only person in the hallway, Tamsin said. Wood had just called me to his office, so everyone else was in class. Hannah shook her head. This doesn't make sense. Your locker is at least public. My notebook is private. Super private. And I always have it on me. I don't know how someone could have snuck a letter in there. Who has access to your stuff? Tamsin asked. Mom and Dad, I guess. Maybe some people at the rink, but I usually lock up my stuff when I'm there. I don't think I've ever left the locker at school. That's it? My world is really small, Hannah shrugged. It's basically just the rink, home, and school. I spend most of the time at the rink. That's kind of sad, Tamsin said before the part of her brain responsible for filtering filtering insensitive remarks caught up with her mouth. It rarely got so much exercise, so Tamsin couldn't blame it for being a little slow. Sorry, I didn't mean. No, Hannah said. You're right. It's not ideal, I guess, but sometimes you have to make sacrifices if you want to succeed. And you've chosen to sacrifice having an actual life? Hannah shrugged. I'd rather have an Olympics gold medal. Tamsin felt herself at the edge of at that great precipice. To step forward would risk destroying her fragile friendship she felt forming between them, but caution had never been a strong suit. Is a gold medal worth killing yourself for? Hannah froze, her fingers hovering over the tarot card. Her eyes started up to meet Tamsin's. They were wide, and she was blinking too fast. What are you talking about? The tone of Hannah's question contained the truth she didn't speak. She was exactly what they were. She knew exactly what they were talking about, but denial was probably a reflex for her at this point. You have you eaten anything today? Like for real? I don't want to have this conversation with you, Hannah said, each word sharpened to a fine point. And I have already told you I did. Okay, fine, Tamsin said, but the damage was done. Hannah stood, collecting her things. She shoved the note into her backpack, and her movements stilled. I gotta go. She didn't wait for Tamsin to say goodbye before she strode to the door and stomped down the stairs. Tamsin watched her go. Her smartwatch buzzed again and again. She didn't bother looking at it. Noah Rayner, rating 64. Noah tried to time his visits to Mongolia Children's Hospital when he knew his mother wasn't there. He was still avoiding his parents after the unexpected real- revelation of the blood test, but he'd never really relinquished being relished being at the hospital with her. She had a tendency to hover over Cece in a way both he and her and his sister both found gratifying, gratit, gratiti, gra, gratiating. Neither one of them complained. Noah couldn't imagine what it must feel like to have a terminally ill child, so he had no business telling his mother how to behave. But it was always something of a relief when she left. Cece's main issue wasn't actually the recovering, it was their mother's draconian view of snack views. The woman monitored every morsel of food that went into Cece's diet, but a 12-year-old girl had needs, no matter how sick she was, which was why she smile nearly blinded Noah with its intensity when he held up the bag of goodies he'd smuggled in. I brought all your faves, he said as he dumped an unhealthy amount of candy on the bed. Every kind of chocolate imaginable, flavored with sea salt, raspberry, caramel, and mint. Sour gummy worms, rainbow gummies shaped like little sharks, raisin coated in yogurt, lollipops with mysterious centers, and a bag of chips in case she needed a little salt to counteract the sweet. You're a true hero, Cece said. She hugged him with one arm while the other swept the candy closer to her. One of the first gifts he brought her during the first day at Mongolia was a large stuffed bear that unzipped in the back, exposing a pouch large enough to hide all her illicit treats. The first few times Cece had glutted herself to the point of nausea, but with time she learned the beauty of rationing her supply. It lasted longer, and she wouldn't puke all the colors of the rainbow. Noah perched on the edge of her bed as she watched her divvy up what to eat now and what to save for later. He thought about not telling her, but a secret like that would fester if left on its own. He hadn't talked to his parents about it yet. There were too many emotions all jumbled up together to make it an easy conversation. But he wanted Cece to know. She had a right to know. "Hey, Sparkplug," he said. "There's something I want to talk to you about." She rolled her eyes at him. "I'm never gonna live down that fork in the electrical socket incident, am I?" "Nope, never." "I was 5," she said, with as much indignation as a 12-year-old could muster, which was rather a lot. "Doesn't matter. It's on your permanent record, Sparkplug." He ruffled her hair, smiling when she pulled away with her hair all fluffed up. Noah finally noticed it was much thinner than it had been. "What's this?" Cece asked, sorting the gum sharks into an orderly rainbow. "I got tested," Noah said, "for my bone marrow." Her hands paused, one still holding the green shark as she raised her eyebrow to meet his. There was much expectation in them. Chest Noah's chest constricted, like his rib cage was trying to crush his vital organs. "I'm not a match." A moment of silence passed between them, heavy with all the possibilities that statement had just washed away. But then Cece sighed and popped the green shark into her mouth. When she spoke, her words came out muffled. "It was a long shot to begin with," she said, paused to swallow, "but thanks for trying." That was not the reaction Noah had expected. He'd braced himself for crying, maybe even a little anger, but she barely looked flustered by the news. Already, her attention had drifted away from him and back to her candy hoard. She wiggled her fingers over the pile before she settled on a bar of chocolate. "Might as well go all out," Noah thought to himself. He had always told Cece everything. It would feel disingenuous to start hiding things from her now. "That's not all," he said. Cece didn't even look up at him as she tore open the candy wrapper. "Oh, I'm adopted." Cece looked at him, handful of chocolate halfway to her mouth. "So? So? So?" "So?" Noah repeated, because it was one of those things that bore repeating. "Wait, did you know?" The idea that his 12-year-old sister could have kept a secret of that magnitude was unthinkable. Once, years ago, she'd caught Noah pilfering $5 from their mother's purse during a particularly sweltering summer. He'd wanted to buy a vanilla cone with rainbow sprinkles from the ice cream truck that she'd promised not to tell, provided he brought her one too, and had lasted all of 7 minutes before cracking. Their mother had simply asked if Cece had seen her car keys. Cece shook her head, biting into the chocolate bar with crispy rice. Those were her favorites. "No, just don't think it's a big deal. That it's a big deal." "But it is." Noah's voice ticked up an octave he hadn't realized he could hit. The mere shrug was all Cece offered him. I have a hive fresh full for big news. Oh my god. What 12-year-old old talks like this? All I do is read all day and my vocabulary is epic. So wait, Noah said he wasn't quite done torturing himself. This doesn't bother you at all? No, Cece looked at him like he was being exceptionally dense. Why would it? Because that's why I can't be your donor. Cece put down the chocolate bar and leveled him with an eerily intense stare. No, it's okay. It doesn't change anything. You're still my dumb brother, and I'm still your exceptional sister. Everything is just like it was before. Even if you're now burdened with a great and terrible knowledge that's honestly not that great or terrible. It felt pretty terrible, Noel muttered, pressing his thumb onto the side of the package of bubble gum. If it bothers you so much, you should talk to Mom and Dad about it. Noah shrugged. Yeah, maybe. Stacy plucked the bubble gum away from him. Plenty of people are adopted. Maybe you should just get over it. I know it sounds harsh, but I say that with love. Now stop messing with my candy. That he could just get over it hadn't really occurred to Noah until that point, and it was possible she had a point. Being a blood relation wouldn't have been a guarantee. He'd have been a bone marrow match anyway. The odds would have been better, but by no means it would be had it been a certainty. And it's not like his parents weren't his parents anymore. Javi had said as much at Lucky's, but it hadn't sunk in then. It still wasn't quite sinking fully in, but it was starting to penetrate the thick layer of indignity in which he'd wrapped himself in. You're smiling, Cece said. It's a dumb smile, like you're thinking about a girl or something. Noah blinked before he could stop himself. He said, not a girl. Cece's grin widened. A boy then? So this conversation they were having to they were going to have now too. Great. Yeah, Noah said and left it there. Are you gay? Cece asked. She had no flitter filter. When she wanted to know something, she never wasted time fretting about it. She simply asked. Noah picked at the edge of her bedspread. It was one from home that her grandmother had crocheted long before either of them were born. I don't think so. I've liked girls before, and his he had his attraction to Javi didn't negate that. I think I might be bi. Dude, you're just hitting me with all the revelations today. Cece said, maybe you should have spread them out a little bit, saved some for the slow days. Noah let out a little smile. Yeah, maybe I should have. I'll just have to come up with something more outlandish next time. You better. Cece leaned in, her groan going slightly man- maniacal. Maniacal. So tell me everything about this boy. His name, his favorite color, his thoughts on how you pronounce Jif. She said it with a hard G, like GIF. Noah pronounced it with a soft G, like giraffe. GIF. 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 On this they would never agree. Have you always been this noisy? he asked as he, "Hello?" as he watched her turn to another candy bar. Or is this new development? There's not a lot of juicy gossip in on the ward, she said, mouth full of half-chewed chocolate. It was gross, but also cute, because Cece was her little sister and she could do no wrong. Do you like him? What's his intentions? I don't know, Noah said. Which one? Either. Cece shoved another piece into her mouth as she mulled over his obviously inadequate answer. How do you not know if you like a person? Isn't that the kind of thing where you either do or you don't?